I was sleeping in my room when I heard the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. It was late, nearly midnight, and the apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the city beyond the glass. Dad was out of town again, another architectural conference upstate. That left me alone in the apartment with Isabelle. She wasn't my mom, not really. She married Dad 5 years ago, long after my mother passed. I kept my distance. She tried in the beginning offering rides, leaving stacks outside my door, commenting on my sketches. But I wasn't ready to let her in, so eventually she stopped trying so hard. We existed like polite roommates who shared meals only when Dad was around. That night, something felt different. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was the quiet, or maybe I was just tired of pretending like her presence didn't affect me. I couldn't sleep, so I walked out into the hallway to get a glass of water. The kitchen light was on. Isabelle stood at the stove, stirring something in a small pot. She looked up, surprised, then smiled gently. "Can't sleep?" she asked. I nodded. She poured some cocoa into a mug and slid it toward me without a word. It was the first time in years we'd stood that close without a barrier of silence. Between us, I noticed details I'd never allowed myself to before: how tired she looked, how graceful her movements were, how she always hummed the same soft tune under her breath. We didn't say much, just sipped cocoa and listened to the thunder roll in the distance. I don't know why, but it felt good, simple, human. I returned to my room but couldn't shake the feeling. The warmth of the drink lingered in my chest. I glanced at the sketchbook on my desk and flipped to a page I hadn't dared to finish. It was a drawing of her Isabelle sitting by the window, unaware that I had once watched her from across the living room. She had this peaceful look, like she was somewhere else entirely. I hadn't drawn her out of admiration. It was something more subtle, more complicated. She was part of this life I hadn't chosen, but her presence had become a quiet constant. The next morning, I found her in the living room, watering the plants. She didn't notice me at first. When she did, she smiled again, same soft smile. I held out the sketch, unsure why. She took it without a word, studied it, then looked at me. "You're talented," she said softly. "I didn't know you." "Saw me like this," I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't either until I drew it." She folded the page carefully and placed it on the table. "Your mom would be proud. I think about her sometimes too." It was the first time we acknowledged the space she once filled. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. Isabelle stepped closer but didn't reach out. Instead, she said, "Thank you for letting me see." In that moment, something shifted between us. Not in a dramatic way, but like a door had opened slightly. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same side of it. Later that day, I found myself watching her move around the apartment, how she adjusted the cushions, opened windows too, let in the breeze, made tea like a ritual. There was an elegance to her routine that felt comforting. I'd always thought of her as someone filling space that wasn't hers. But now, I realized she was quietly creating a new one that had room for me if I chose to step into it. When the power flickered out that evening, we laughed awkwardly. Isabel lit candles, humming her familiar tune. We sat on the floor, with crackers and fruit, the apartment wrapped in a soft golden glow. She told me stories about growing up in Maine, about art school, and why she never became a professional painter. I listened, really listened. She wasn't just my stepmother. In that moment, she was a woman with dreams, regrets, humor. I shared things too, about college, pressure, how I still talk to my mom in my head when things get hard. The conversation flowed easily, like two people learning how to breathe and sync. I don't remember everything we said, only that it was the most honest I'd been with anyone in a long time. That night, I dreamed about my mom. She stood at the edge of my bed, smiling. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said. Let people love you. I woke up with her voice echoing in my chest. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting long lines across the floor. I stood and walked into the kitchen. Isabelle was already there, reading a book. She looked up, surprised but pleased. Morning, she said. Morning, I replied. Reaching for a mug dot, we stood side by side in silence. Then I turned and said, Thanks for last night, and for not giving up on me. She looked at me carefully, like she was trying to decide if I meant it. Then she nodded. I never wanted to replace her. Just wanted to be someone you could count on. I sat at the table, heart pounding. Maybe I needed someone to remind me I could still feel things. We spent that day walking through Central Park. The city buzzed in the distance, but the park felt like another world. Isabelle pointed out hidden corners I'd never noticed. She bought me a pretzel and made fun of how much mustard I used. For the first time in years, I laughed. Really laughed. We ended up at a small community art center where she volunteered. She introduced me to the coordinator, casually mentioning my sketches. Before I could object, I was being invited to display at the upcoming youth exhibition. Isabelle gave me a knowing look, proud but not pushy. At home that evening, I stared at my sketchbook again. This time, I didn't draw her from memory. I drew how she made me feel safe, seen, steady. She knocked gently on my door and peeked in. Want some tea? I nodded. She didn't enter, just smiled and said, It's nice to have you back. As I lay in bed, I realized I wasn't just sleeping in my room anymore. I was waking up to something entirely new. Not a replacement. Not a romance, but a quiet truth. Love can come from unexpected places. And sometimes family is not who you're born to, but who stays through the silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. I was just here. And it was enough. The days that followed felt unfamiliar, but in the best way. The silence between Isabelle and me no longer felt heavy. It was calm, open, and welcoming. Something subtle had shifted, a mutual understanding built on shared moments that didn't need to be spoken aloud. I found myself gravitating toward her presence, not out of obligation, but comfort. I'd sit with her in the evenings while she read or painted, neither of us needing to fill the air with small talk. There was peace in that quiet companionship. She showed me her old sketchbooks, one afternoon-worn pages filled with charcoal. Figures, wild landscapes, portraits of people I didn't recognize. Her work was good, more than good. It had emotion, soul. When I asked why she stopped, she shrugged. Life happened, she said. I guess I thought maybe it was too late to try again. I looked at her, surprised by how unsure she sounded. She always seemed so composed, but in that moment, I saw her vulnerability. And I respected her even more for it. She encouraged me to finish pieces for the art exhibit. At first, I resisted. The idea of putting my work out there, especially in front of people, was terrifying, but she didn't push. She simply left blank canvas on my desk one morning with a note that read, for whatever needs saying. In the evenings, we'd review my progress. She offered gentle critiques, praised the color choices I was unsure of, and even laughed at my more experimental pieces. Her guidance wasn't technical, it was emotional. She taught me how to trust. My instinct to tell stories through images when words failed me. The day of the exhibit came faster than expected. The gallery was modest but warm, the walls lined with young artists' work. Mine hung in the corner, 5 pieces I almost didn't submit. Isabelle stood beside me, glowing with pride. When I gave my short speech, I surprised myself by thanking her publicly. To the one person who saw what I couldn't say, I said. She reached for my hand and squeezed it. That small gesture said more than any applause. Later that night, I felt overwhelmed, not by attention, by emotion. I sat on the apartment balcony alone, trying to make sense of what was stirring inside me. It wasn't love in the romantic sense. It was deeper, more complex. I admired Isabelle, her strength, her patience, her kindness, and I realized I had confused my need for connection with something else. I wasn't falling for her. I was healing for her, but the thought still unsettled me. Was it wrong to feel this close to someone who had once felt like a stranger in my life? A friend I confided in later misread my hesitation. He warned me to be careful, to not blur lines. His words echoed longer than they should have. I began, avoiding Isabelle not out of shame, but confusion. She noticed, of course. Her warmth dimmed just slightly. She gave me space, never asking why I withdrew. I missed our conversations. I missed how easy things had become. But I couldn't go back without understanding what I truly felt. I needed clarity. A few days later, Mrs. Greer, our elderly neighbor, caught me on the stairs. She'd always had this quiet wisdom, the kind that didn't need many words. "You've been quiet lately," she said. I nodded, not offering more. She sipped her tea and added, "Sometimes when we're healing, we mistake care for closeness. That doesn't mean the love isn't real. It just means we're learning what kind it is." Her words settled into me like warm light. I went back to my room and stared at my sketchbook. This time, I didn't draw. I wrote a letter to Isabelle. In it, I told her everything I'd been holding in, that I had struggled with where she fit into my heart, that I had mistaken the comfort she gave me for something it wasn't, and that now I finally understood. She wasn't a replacement. She wasn't a fantasy. She was real, and I loved her as the mother figure I had spent years pushing away. I slid the letter under her door and waited. The next morning, she made breakfast like usual. I joined her. She didn't mention the letter, but when she handed me my plate, her eyes were glassy. "I'm glad you're back," she said softly. That was all. That was enough. When Dad returned a few days later, he noticed the difference. I saw the flicker of surprise in his expression as Isabelle and I moved around the apartment, joking easily, speaking with unspoken familiarity. At dinner, he smiled and said, "This is nice," and it was. For the first time in years, the table felt full. I continued painting. Isabelle started too. She brought out her supplies and set up a small corner in the living room. It became our shared ritual quiet afternoons, lost in art and music, conversations that skipped the surface and went straight to the heart. She encouraged me to submit more work to other galleries. I helped her restart her portfolio. One afternoon, we walked past the old bookstore near Columbus Avenue. She paused at the window and pointed to a framed quote. "Some love stories aren't about romance. They're about rescue." She looked at me and smiled knowingly. "Sounds familiar," she whispered. I never forgot that line, because that's what she did. She rescued me, not in some dramatic way, but gently, consistently, with grace. And I allowed myself to be rescued, not as a boy lost in grief, but as a young man learning how to feel again. A few weeks later, I visited Mrs. Greer. I told her how things had changed. She listened, then said something that has stayed with me ever since. It takes courage to let someone matter after you've been hurt. Most people run from that. But you didn't, and neither did she. When I walked back home, the city lights seemed softer somehow. The apartment felt warmer. Isabelle greeted me with a cup of tea and her usual soft hum. I sat beside her on the couch, sketchbook in hand, and began a new drawing. Not of her, not of myself, but of a shared space, 2 chairs by the window, tea mugs, art supplies scattered. On the floor, a life slowly built between 2 people who refused to give up on each other. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. Love isn't always about passion or declarations. Sometimes it's about choosing someone again and again, even when it's hard. especially when it's hard. I remembered Mom said in my dream, let people love you. I had, and it didn't make me forget her. It made me remember what she would have wanted for me to live, to laugh, to feel. And I finally was. If someone had told me months ago that the woman I'd once called an outsider would become the person who helped rebuild me, I wouldn't have believed them. But life has a strange way of giving second chances in the most unexpected forms. This wasn't a story about forbidden love or scandal. It was a story about emotional rescue, about how two people can bridge grief and misunderstanding with patience, respect, and time. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Love in its truest form doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't ask for more than you can give. It just waits quietly, steadily until you're ready to let it in. And when you do, it changes everything.